In Memoria Adytum. SCP-4476. Church of the Eternal Mother. SCP-4476 is a small fishing village accessible only by boat in the far western part of Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, with an estimated population of 45. The entire population, designated SCP-4476-1, is made up of members of the Natal family, and they all display significant birth defects and physical abnormalities. These physical abnormalities primarily present as large tumorous growths as a result of fetus in foetu. These growths are treated with a great deal of respect, and SCP-4476-1 refer to them as the Unborn. The language spoken by SCP-4476-1 is a fusion of Proto-Uralic Adytite mixed with the local French-English Creole. While it is uncertain how long this family has lived in the area, linguistic drift analysis suggests that they originally spoke Adytite, with the local Creole adopted sometime in the latter half of the 17th century. The social hierarchy of SCP-4476-1 revolves around a group of 5 visually identical, elderly females, designated SCP-4476-1A, which the others refer to collectively as Mama Natal. It is unclear how SCP-4476-1 distinguishes between the 5, and careful genetic sampling indicates that the 5 sisters represent the matriarchal genesis of every other member of SCP-4476-1. It is also of note that one of the 5 instances of SCP-4476-1A is always pregnant. The population of SCP-4476 remains exceptionally stable even with the observed rate of pregnancies. There have been no reported cases of illness within the family group, and no observed accidental deaths. It is currently unknown whether the absence of additional children is a result of stillbirth, or a high infant mortality rate. When asked about this phenomena or the anomalously high pregnancies, the locals will give evasive or non-answers. The villagers rarely travel far from SCP-4476, and thus their diet is restricted to the flora and fauna that can be found within the exclusion zone. Dietary staples include several types of fish, a variety of swamp cabbage one cultivated in a nearby field, several species of frogs, and small alligators. The infrastructure of SCP-4476 is made up of one large residential structure, a storage shed, a small building primarily used for drying collected swamp cabbage, a short dock with several small fishing punts, and a medium-sized anomalous 2 structure that serves as both a religious gathering place and birthing house. SCP-4476-1 spend the majority of their time either working in the cabbage field, fishing, cooking, or mending the nets they utilize for fishing and catching frogs. SCP-4476-1 adhere to a strict pattern of 6 working days with a single day of religious observance. While generally tolerant of Foundation researchers, SCP-4476-1 will become hostile to all outsiders that intrude on their religious practices. These rituals take place inside the church-like structure, and until recently have been entirely unobserved. SCP-4476 is contained within a 3-kilometer exclusion zone on the far western edge of Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. Site-93A has been set up in the nearby town of Port Sulphur under the cover story Lambda Mu-22A, Gulf Shore Cleanup Operation. Additionally, the local economy has been artificially depressed in order to encourage the local residents to leave, as well as to discourage population growth. MTF Beta-2 Bayou Boys are to routinely patrol the nearby marshlands to prevent outside intrusion as well as to contain the inhabitants of SCP-4476 from exiting the exclusion zone. Due to the high-traffic nature of the bayou fishing industry, additional resources have been allocated to the containment of SCP-4476. This includes the expansion of MTF Beta-2 to company strength, with a variety of amphibious vehicles and several bayou patrol helicopters. Any non-SCP-4476 resident apprehended attempting to enter the exclusion zone is to be interrogated and released after amnestic treatment. SCP-4476 was initially discovered in late April of 2010, following reports of concern for Analka Family 3 made by several denizens of Loi 504 La Rue Macabre during the cleanup of the Deepwater incident involving SCP. These reports were followed up on by members of MTF Beta 2 Bayou Boys, and they were eventually able to locate the village. Initial contact was made with the villagers on April 29, 2010. Due to the isolated nature of the area, it was decided that SCP-4476 should be contained in its original location. Site 93A was established utilizing the cleanup effort as cover, and remains there to this day. While SCP-4476-1 mostly ignored the Foundation presence, no headway was made in successfully establishing a permanent research presence, primarily due to the difficulty presented by the language barrier. Upon a request by Site Director Stanley Arthur, the Foundation Oversight Committee agreed to bring in Dr. Isabel Beaumont, a local anthropologist that had previously shown marked success in developing ongoing contact with other local indigenous cultural groups. Her relevant research logs and memorandum are included. Researcher, Dr. Isabel Beaumont. August 8, 2010. Personal log. Despite the obvious heavy-handedness of this foundation, I was excited to be involved in this project. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, even after reviewing the documents that Dr. Arthur had provided. I read the reports from Dr. Demeray, and I admit I still wasn't quite prepared for what I met when I first arrived at the Natal family village. While the obvious physical deformities displayed by the family are a bit unusual, I didn't really see anything to differentiate this family from many other cultural groups in the area. Subsistence farmers, strong ties to the local ecology, communal living arrangements, etc. Even their language, while differing quite a bit in certain verb phrasing and word usage, is not entirely different from other variations of Louisiana French Creole I've encountered before. What really threw me off was their temple. The Natal referred to it as Sarkic, which according to the lexicon given to me by Dr. Arthur means roughly holy, or sacred, temple, with connotations of it being alive. I thought that would mean that it was made of living plant matter, grown directly from the swamp. I couldn't have been more wrong. I don't think I can do this. Researcher, Dr. Isabel Beaumont. August 9, 2010. Personal log. After giving it a lot of thought and drinking copious amounts of tea, I've decided that weird as they are, the Natal represent an excellent opportunity to study a cultural group that has so far been undocumented by modern anthropological science. I had no idea that such an unknown group could exist in the United States. Anyway, even with the revulsion that I feel towards their temple, it is my job to document it to the best of my ability. The building itself is rather small, covering an area of roughly 47 square meters. Like the other Natal structures, it stands on pilings driven into the swamp, but it is only connected to the rest of the platform by a short bridge made from strands of sinew and supported by planks of bone. The pilings themselves look like grotesquely extended arms with fused elbow joints. The hands are splayed quite widely across the soft ground of the area beneath it, with the fingers disappearing into the turf, remarkably similarly to a tree's root structure. There are no window openings into the interior, and the only entrance appears to be a large sphincter in the side facing the rest of the Natal settlement. We've not been allowed to remain during the Natal Holy Day, so I haven't been able to get a peek inside. Not sure if I want to, really. The accessible portion of the building stands about 9 feet tall at its highest point, and is in a rough oblong shape, giving it somewhat of a Quonset hut appearance. For some reason looking at it for too long gives me a bit of a headache, and I had no desire to get a closer view. The Natal clearly didn't want me to anyway, so that was a bit of a relief. End of log. Despite Dr. Beaumont's initial hesitation, significant progress was made towards understanding SCP-4476-1 and their way of life. After several months of study and interaction, Dr. Beaumont was able to give valuable insight into their language and cultural heritage. The bulk of Dr. Beaumont's notes and reference materials has been omitted for brevity, but are available upon request. In June of 2011, Dr. Beaumont made a request on behalf of SCP-4476-1 for a semi-permanent generator, as well as lighting, an electric stove, and a refrigeration unit. After a series of exchanges between Dr. Beaumont and Dr. Arthur, this request was granted. This marked a significant turn in the Foundation's relationship with SCP-4476-1, and Dr. Beaumont began spending most of her time at the village. The SCP document now shows the second Dr. Beaumont personal log. It reads: Researcher, Dr. Isabel Beaumont. June 19, 2011. Personal log. I think that I've finally been accepted by La Famille Natal. I've been spending a lot of time at the village speaking to the younger members of the family, and I've even been able to take part in some of their meals and daily rituals. They still won't let me stay during their holy day, but I think that might also change. After getting the Foundation to put in the generator and lights, I think that the family has begun to see the benefit of having me around. I also think that I'm beginning to understand the differences between the Mamos Natal, at least in how they reference them. There is a definite sequence to their pregnancies. Only one of them carries a child at any one time. Whichever one is pregnant, the others begin referring to her as Manma Nuda, which is close enough to Manma Natal that I think that most would simply chalk it up to a slip of the tongue. But on a hunch I looked into it, and Nuda is close enough to be the late Adytite Nuda, which is their word for sorceress or shaman. This cannot be a coincidence, and it is significant in unlocking more of their cultural mysteries. It took some convincing, but I managed to persuade the current Manma Nuda to sit down with me for a more structured interview. Now let's see if I have enough of a grasp on their dialect to translate it for the other Foundation researchers. End of log. On June 20, 2011, Dr. Beaumont conducted an interview with one of the SCP-4476-1A instances. The interview was conducted in the local dialect of Louisiana Creole and was translated by Dr. Beaumont. A portion of that translation follows. Interviewed, Manma Nuda, resident of SCP-4476. Interviewer, Dr. Isabel Beaumont, SCP-4476 head researcher. Forward, this is the first time that any of the Mamos Natal have consented to sit down for a structured interview. While I've talked with them several times, they've remained reluctant to share much. Dr. Beaumont sat down with Manma Nuda, a member of a community that had been living in the area for generations. She wanted to learn more about their history and culture. Dr. Beaumont began. I'd like to ask you a bit about your history, how long you've been here, and... Manma Nuda interrupted. You would not believe me, Mina. None of the children of this new land ever do. Even old man Nancy does not believe. Dr. Beaumont was taken aback, but she remained curious and asked Nuda to share her stories and tales anyway. I remember the burning towers of Gyros as we sailed away. Karsus Mexa wanted to go Kithara, to reunite with our beloved Ion, but we could not, Nuda said. Dr. Beaumont was confused and asked for clarification. Nuda explained that it was a long time ago, before even Dr. Beaumont's ancestors knew of this land. A storm had ravaged the Aegean, and they were swept past the Great Rock, into the endless waters of the Western Sea. They were lost and adrift, until they landed in the far north, where they tried to make a place for themselves. Why didn't you just try and go home? Dr. Beaumont asked. We all knew that the Grand Karcist had fallen, Mina. There was no home to return to, Nuda replied. Dr. Beaumont accepted Nuda's explanation, and they moved on to another topic. She had noticed that Nuda's family rarely got sick and asked her about it. Ion has blessed us, Mina. We use his gift to keep the Alak-6 safe from the small things in the waters, Nuda said. Dr. Beaumont was familiar with the Nalka divinity, and assumed it was what Nuda was referring to. However, Nuda clarified that Ion was not the Nalka divinity. The Grand Karsus was their intercessor, who had taught them the way and showed them how to be more. They kept to his ways and shaped their Alak to become a vessel for his return. I am confused. You said that your Grand Carcist fell. Is Ion the name you give to your current Grand Carcist? Dr. Beaumont asked. Yes and no. Beloved Ion is no longer of this world, but he is still with us, in our blood, in the way. He is our only Grand Carcist, and he will return to guide all of his children to Adytum. We seek purity in order to join him when the time comes, Nuda explained. Dr. Beaumont was intrigued but had more questions. She asked Nuda about Carcist Mexa, and Nuda hesitated, saying it was something that Dr. Beaumont would not believe. Dr. Beaumont respected Nuta's wishes and changed the subject to fishing. The rest of their conversation was unremarkable, and Dr. Beaumont ended the interview shortly after. End of log. After several more successful interviews, mostly involving details of the daily life of SCP-4476-1, Dr. Beaumont was invited to participate in a birthing ritual. Her request to attend was initially denied by the site director, but that decision was overruled by the Oversight Committee in the interest of gaining more information regarding the activities of SCP-4476-1. Dr. Isabel Beaumont. September 8, 2011. Personal log. I was finally given a chance to observe one of the Natau's religious ceremonies. It was quite a fight for me to get permission to attend, and I guessed that Dr. Arthur was overruled by someone higher up the chain than him. Even then, he wanted to send a group of the Bayou Boys with me, but I flatly refused. Manma Nuda was quite clear that only I was allowed to attend, and she wouldn't let me take any equipment in with me. I can only imagine what would have happened if a group of Foundation operatives tried to bully their way in with me. In the end, there was nothing for anyone to worry about. The ritual was only a little stranger than some of the other birthing practices I've observed in the past. Well, maybe a lot stranger, but I was still in no danger. The inside of the Kirok was pretty much what I expected. The walls pulsed, and when the sphincter opened, I swear it was like walking down the throat of some huge animal. I'm used to moist, warm air. I've been living in the swamp for years. But it was different. It had a smell to it that. The whole building was a single room centered around a small pool grown into the floor. I wasn't certain, but I think the liquid in the pool was some analog to amniotic fluid. It certainly had a similar viscosity. And smell. The entire room was lit by numerous small candles that were placed in small niches in the walls. When everyone had gathered inside, there wasn't much room to move around. It also got quite warm, and I regretted not adopting the Natau practice of participating mostly nude. When everyone had gathered and the door had closed, the ritual began. The 4 non-pregnant Manma Natau stood around the pool and assisted Manma Nuda as she climbed into it. After she was settled, everyone sat on the floor and began to chant. It took hours, and I felt every minute of it. The air was stiflingly hot, and I had difficulty breathing. Nothing much seemed to change for quite a while. Then Manma Nuda began to struggle with the birthing process. I have no idea how many children she's given birth to over the years, but I could clearly see that the process was quite painful for her. Each time she pushed, she would grunt in agony, and the rest of the Natau would chant louder. There was an energy to it that I can't describe, and I felt myself carried along with it. Eventually everything came to a climax, and she was able to finally give birth. I must admit, I was enthralled by the whole affair, but when Manma Natau lifted the baby from the flea pool, I was horrified. I cannot describe what I saw. Suffice it to say that the child was a stillbirth. Afterwards I was told that most of the children born to the Natau don't survive. They either are stillbirths or they die a few days later. Either way, the infant mortality rate is really high and, well, they use the babies to feed the Kirok, and that's all I'm going to say about that. End of log. Dr. Beaumont then was invited to participate in an overnight ritual with SCP-4476-1. She indicated that she had been invited to join the family, and expressed interest. She assured Dr. Arthur that this was standard practice within many indigenous peoples, and it would be a formality that would be rude to ignore. The next morning, Dr. Beaumont failed to return from her stay with SCP-4476-1. On the morning of July 11th, 4 members of MTF Beta 2 Bayou Boys raided SCP-4476 with the objective of either retrieving Dr. Beaumont or ascertaining her status. The following is a transcript of that raid from the viewpoint of the team lead, Sergeant Narno. This is the transcript of their video exploration log. MTF Beta 2 Bayou Boys. Search and rescue of Dr. Isabel Beaumont from SCP-4476. Team lead, Sergeant Nicholas Arnault Alpha. Begin log. The team of Beta 2 was on a mission to retrieve Dr. Beaumont from SCP-4476, a location known for its anomalous properties. As they approached the site, Alpha addressed the team, boys and girl, check your equipment and comms. Stick together, and we shouldn't have any problems until we try and enter the temple. Delta, you're our cutter if the door doesn't open for us. Delta let out a sigh. I hate that we're all called boys. Alpha replied, take it up with Command, Delta. You weren't around when Beta 2 was formed. The team arrived at SCP-4476, but SCP-4476-1 mostly ignored them until they got closer to the temple. An SCP-4476-1A instance was seen pointing their way, and Alpha turned to Beta. Looks like they're taking notice of us. Beta, go. Beta jogged across the bridge to the temple, and Alpha and Delta followed closely behind. Suddenly, several SCP-4476-1 ran towards them, each clutching farming implements. Alpha ordered Gamma, keep them off our 6. Delta, go for insertion. Delta moved ahead carrying a tool and pushed it into the skin around the sphincter, causing her to be coated in gore. After a few seconds, a hole large enough for the team to enter had been cut into the side of the building. As Beta reached the pool inside the temple, Alpha looked around and saw Dr. Beaumont partially absorbed by the wall. Shit, check for vitals, he ordered. Beta approached Dr. Beaumont and exclaimed, damn, Sarge. Is that? Alpha turned to Beta, Christ, what the hell is it supposed to be? We'll get you out of there, hold on. Dr. Beaumont coughed and gasped, this isn't what it looks like. Muffled gunshots were heard from outside, and Delta shouted, Sarge, hurry up in there, it looks like the whole damn town is fixin' to come down on us. Alpha turned back to Dr. Beaumont, who was struggling to speak. No. Don't. She coughed, blood frothing at the corners of her mouth. They wanted me to join the family. They wanted me to become part of Manma Natau. I went willingly. I just wasn't strong enough. Beta cut Dr. Beaumont down, and the team quickly extracted to the waiting helicopter. The team faced more resistance from SCP-4476-1 individuals, resulting in the incapacitation of 3 of them. As they flew away from SCP-4476, Alpha let out a sigh of relief. We've retrieved the document. I don't want to hang out here any longer than we have to. End log. Dr. Beaumont was taken directly to the Site 93A infirmary where she was pronounced dead. As per protocol, an autopsy was performed and her cause of death was listed as massive exsanguination due to improper surgical procedure. Also of note is that her uterus and reproductive organs were missing in toto and were never recovered. From the data retrieved from Dr. Beaumont's notes, it is believed that SCP-4476-1A were attempting to harvest genetic material from Dr. Beaumont in order to integrate her into the family. An update of the SCP file stated that an additional iteration of SCP-4476-1A has been observed. It should also be noted that all 6 iterations are showing signs of pregnancy. All further contact with SCP-4476 has been restricted until further notice.